I must warn you. What I am about to tell you is not the kind of tale recorded in proud chronicles or carved into marble for future generations. No, these are the stories that lived in whispers, carried by trembling voices across centuries. Stories that even scribes feared to write down. They speak of empresses unlike any others, women whose beauty was blinding, whose crowns shone brighter than the sun, yet whose desires twisted empires into shadows of fear. Rituals were performed in secret chambers, behind sealed doors heavy with incense smoke, where devotion turned to despair and pleasure became punishment. These ceremonies were not born of love, nor of piety, but of hunger for power, hunger for control, hunger that consumed both body and soul. So listen closely, for tonight you will hear of forbidden acts, of bodies turned into offerings, of thrones that became theaters of horror. Stay with me, for this is the tale of the most horrifying sexual rituals of ancient empresses. The chronicles describe these empresses as dazzling women cloaked in jewels that glittered like captured stars and in silks so fine they shimmered like firelight. To their subjects, they appeared divine, almost more than human, their smiles a promise of fortune, their beauty an omen of power. But those who stood too close, those who dared to serve in their private courts, learned a darker truth. Behind the radiant mask of beauty, behind the carefully painted lips and the golden crowns, lay an obsession. An obsession not with love, nor with glory, but with control. To rule men, these empresses believed, one must first conquer their flesh. In the eastern courts, whispers spread like smoke. It was said the empress demanded nightly rituals from noblemen, rituals not spoken of in daylight, but feared in silence. When the chamber doors were sealed, the air thickened with incense, sweet yet suffocating. And what followed was not devotion but submission. The proudest of men entered those chambers upright and strong, their heads high with dignity. But when they left, if they left at all, their steps faltered, their eyes empty, their spirits shattered. For the ritual was never meant to please. It was meant to bind chains of flesh and fear stronger than any chain of iron. I have read old accounts, written in quivering script, of musicians summoned to play through the night. They plucked their strings with trembling hands, their sweat dripping onto the wood of their lutes, while the empress commanded rites too dreadful to describe. The music drowned the cries, the rhythm concealed the horror. And yet sometimes when the silence fell, all that remained was the sound of weeping. Some participants were never seen again. Their names were struck from the rolls of nobility, their portraits removed from palace walls. It was as though history itself sought to erase them, as if the empire wished to forget the price of its empress's hunger. One tale, whispered in taverns and scribed only in the margins of forbidden texts, tells of an empress draped entirely in crimson. Her robe shimmered like fresh blood beneath the torchlight, and she sat upon a throne of ivory carved so finely it seemed to glow. At her feet, great sheets of silk stretched across the marble floor, so delicate that every spill, every stain, would remain forever as a mark of what had passed there. On such nights, nobles and warriors alike were summoned. They were commanded to kneel, stripped not only of their garments, but of dignity, of rank, of everything that made them who they once were. The proud bowed like servants, the strong trembled like children. The ritual did not begin with prayer. No priest dared enter that chamber. Instead, it began with wine. Goblets overflowing, spilling onto the silks in streams that ran like blood. The air grew heavy with the sharp scent of grapes and smoke. Then came the dance. Women cloaked in veils moved in slow serpentine circles, their shadows twisting across the walls like living phantoms. The rhythm of their steps echoed against the stone, a heartbeat that grew louder, faster, until all eyes turned to the empress. And then, with a single gesture, she chose her prey. A trembling noble, a defiant warrior. It did not matter who they were, for in that moment, they belonged to her alone. What followed was spoken of only in terror. Acts of humiliation disguised as devotion. Pleasures demanded until bodies collapsed in exhaustion. Souls bent and broken beneath her gaze. When dawn broke, the survivors stumbled into the courtyards. Their once proud faces were pale, their eyes hollow, their voices forever silenced by fear. Some never spoke again, not of that night, not of anything. The chronicles never name her. Her identity remains cloaked in shadows. But the people remembered, and they gave her a title that survives even now: the Crimson Empress. In another empire, far across the shifting sands of the desert, a queen unlike any other rose to power. She was cloaked in mystery, for she ruled not only through armies and decrees, but through rituals so disturbing that even her closest servants dared not speak of them aloud. They say she wore a mask of solid gold, fashioned with delicate carvings of serpents and suns. It glittered in the torchlight, hiding her face, hiding her eyes, so that no man, no matter how brave, could ever meet her gaze directly. To stand before her was to feel stripped bare, to see her strength and pride dissolve into ash beneath her silence. The rituals began innocently enough, or so the chronicles tell us. Feasts of honey and figs were laid upon golden plates, goblets of sweet wine poured until the floors ran sticky with the spills. Laughter filled the hall at first, but it was hollow, nervous, and short-lived. For when the feasting ended, something far darker began. Her attendants, clad in robes like priests, stepped forward carrying bowls of strange herbs steeped in thick black liquid. The chosen men were dragged or commanded to kneel, their heads bowed to the ground. One by one, they were forced to drink. As the bitter mixture burned in their throats, the hall filled with incense, thick as fog. The smoke curled like living hands, blinding, choking until shapes danced in the haze. And in the center of it all, the Empress sat, her golden mask gleaming. She watched as their bodies began to tremble, their strength failing, their minds slipping into fevered visions. Only then would she rise, only then did the true ritual begin. It was not a ceremony of pleasure, nor of worship, it was a ceremony of domination. The men, once proud, were reduced to shadows of themselves, kneeling, shaking, broken. When the night was over, they were cast aside like discarded offerings, unfit for battle, unfit for court. Mere husks of who they had once been, men in form, but no longer in spirit. The mask, the herbs, the endless ceremonies. Her people came to know her by a name they whispered with dread: the devourer of men. There are stories too shocking even for scholars to accept. Whispers of a hidden temple buried deep beneath the palace, carved into the earth where sunlight never reached. Its walls, it is said, were painted with visions, both alluring and terrifying figures locked in embraces, but twisted with images of death, love, and decay bound together as one. Here, beneath the weight of stone and secrecy, the Empress led her midnight rituals. Torches flickered, their flames dancing against the carvings of writhing bodies, making the painted figures seem alive, shifting in the shadows. The air was thick with incense, bitter and cloying, filling the lungs until every breath felt like drowning. Priests cloaked in darkness circled the chamber, their voices rising in chants no scribe dared to record. The words were old forbiddance, the kind that made even the bravest men tremble. And into this circle of fire and smoke, the chosen victims were brought, men of power, men of pride, men who thought themselves untouchable. But here, they were stripped of all titles, reduced to trembling offerings before the Empress. Their screams were swallowed by the pounding of drums. Their cries were drowned beneath the shrill notes of flutes. The music rose higher and higher until it became a wall of sound, a prison of noise that left no escape. At the very center stood the Empress. Her shadow loomed impossibly large upon the walls, as if she had become something more than human. With every movement, she turned pleasure into punishment, devotion into despair, worship into ruin. It was a ceremony not of love, but of unrelenting domination. And then, as quickly as it began, it ended. When morning came, the heavy doors of the temple creaked open. The torches were extinguished, the smoke drifted into silence. The smell of incense still clung to the air. But the chosen men were gone. Some say they were sacrificed, their blood feeding the stones beneath the palace. Others whisper they lived on, broken and hollow, condemned to wander as her silent shadows, servants stripped of will and voice. The empire prospered on the surface, its markets full, its temples gilded, its armies victorious. But within the palace walls, the court lived in constant fear. Generals, priests, even foreign kings who journeyed across mountains and seas to pay tribute, all knew one truth. To cross the Empress, even in the smallest way, was to risk not just exile, but something far worse. They whispered that entire villages had been emptied overnight. Caravans of men taken under torchlight, never to be seen again. Fathers wept until their eyes ran dry, mothers fell to their knees in prayer, their cries echoing into the heavens. And yet no god answered, no shrine lit aflame in protest. No deity dared intervene against the will of the empress. And still, the people obeyed. Why? Because she was more than mortal in their eyes. Her beauty was blinding, her presence unbearable, as if the divine itself had chosen her as a vessel. To look upon her was to see a goddess draped in mortal skin, untouchable, unstoppable. The whispers of her cruelty did not weaken her legend. They fed it. Every tale of her wrath made her seem more powerful, more inevitable. And the silence of those who returned from her rituals, the hollow stares, the lips that refused to speak, that silence was the loudest testimony of all. It was a reign not built on love, nor even on loyalty, but on the terror of those who dared to survive. And so her story lingers, carried not in official records, but in whispers that drift on the winds of time. It survives in fragments, old songs, half-burned manuscripts, the fearful tales of villagers who swore they heard her name in the night. It stands as a warning that power, when left unchecked, transforms into hunger, and hunger, when indulged without limit, festers into horror. Perhaps these rituals were exaggerated, twisted by rumor, amplified by the fear of her enemies. Perhaps they were nothing more than inventions, stories designed to stain her memory for eternity. And yet, perhaps not. Perhaps in the depths of forgotten crypts, where dust and shadows still cling, her secrets remain waiting silent proof of how far desire can drive a ruler. It reminds us of the thin, fragile line that separates love from madness, devotion from destruction. And it forces us to ask, what would you believe if you stood in those torchlit halls? Would you see a queen, cruel but mortal? Or a goddess, cloaked in gold, ruling through terror of the flesh? Tell me, what do you think? Were these rituals the work of cursed imaginations, or did empresses truly command loyalty through fear and forbidden rites? If you wish to uncover more forbidden and horrifying stories buried in history's shadows, make sure to subscribe and join me again for the next tale from the dark side of the past.